All right. Before I get started, before I get into any of this, I want to list the trigger warnings. They will be listed in the description as well. So if at any point in the video you've forgotten them, want to look in the description, they're going to be there as well. But I want to list them in the beginning just to 100% have them on here, let you guys know, because this is a very serious video. This is not like any other video I have posted before on here. But I think it's important that I do, and I'm going to get into the reasons why. There might be times where I don't use exactly the right word, because a lot of this is going to just be stream of consciousness. I have some notes written, but I want it to be as authentic and sincere as possible, so I didn't want to fully script it out, if that makes sense. But anyway, these are the trigger warnings for this story that I'm about to tell. Mental and emotional abuse, narcissistic manipulation, bullying, gaslighting, mentions of suicidal ideation, mentions of violence, sleep deprivation, and depersonalization and loss of identity. I would like to preface this by saying this is not, by any means, meant to be a silly little anecdote or a gossipy story time. And I intend to treat this subject matter as seriously as possible, because it is a very serious, often difficult topic to discuss in general, but it is also something that happened to me, that I went through, and that does continue to affect me to this day, and will probably continue to affect me for years. But I have taken leaps and bounds since it all ended, and I'm nowhere near healed, but I am step by step, one day at a time, getting better and rediscovering who I am. And a huge part of that is because of this community. And I believe all victims should tell their story if they are in a position where they feel safe enough to do so. And seeing all of the supportive people in this community, and recognizing that there are a lot of impressionable younger fans who are either new to this community or just watched Dan and Phil from an extremely young age. Whatever the case, I feel that telling my story would be beneficial in terms of teaching these young impressionable people how to look for the early signs, the red flags, if you will, before it is too late and you get stuck in the cycle, which I was stuck in this cycle for 2 years. And there was quite a bit of manipulation before that, but I am, in this video, mostly going to be speaking about the 2 years that I lived with this person. I would also like to preface this story by saying this has almost nothing to do with what transpired in 2018, other than a couple of mentions of it within this story where I am describing manipulation tactics used against me that were obviously all lies. But at the time, obviously, I was blind to that. I will also state explicitly that in 2018, I was not the same person that I am today. And I mean that in the sense of me not being a particularly kind or fair person in 2018 during that specific time. I said some very mean, ruthless things back then to people who did not deserve it. I'm not going to mention these people by name. They do know who they are. These are people that I have DM'd a while back privately and have apologized. I do not expect to be forgiven. I do not expect to gain traction from this. I do not expect a bunch of random people who don't really know me to say, "Oh my God, it wasn't your fault, we forgive you," or any of that. That is not what I'm looking for here. The only thing I am seeking out personally in this situation is closure from what specifically happened to me. And that has nothing to do with how I personally acted in 2018. And I still, to this day, even though now I'm no longer seeing it through, for lack of a better term, lemon-colored glasses, now that I'm no longer looking at the situation through that lens, obviously, you know, I have a whole different perspective on everything now, but that doesn't change the fact that I was terrible to these people. And that was my decision. I was making that decision to not be kind. There was manipulation, but that doesn't change how I acted back then. That doesn't change the decisions I made personally. So I do still, to this day, hold myself accountable for what I did. And I do know it was 6 years ago, and I do know that I think, for the most part, the main people affected, it probably is water under the bridge for them at this point. But I wanted to put that in here because to talk about this and not mention that at all seemed counterproductive and seemed insensitive of me. I am the furthest thing from proud of who I was back then, and truly, truly strive to never make people feel the way I made them feel back then. Because I know for a fact the way I made some people feel back then is the way that she made me feel much more recently. And I never, ever want anybody else, especially anybody in this community who I know personally, to go through that and feel that way. It's a horrible feeling. It destroys you. And it's very hard to build yourself back up from it. And words hold weight. Words hold more weight than people want others to believe. And these are things that I've had to learn the hard way. These are things that I've had to learn by experiencing it firsthand for myself. But unfortunately, sometimes that's the way people have to learn. And I have had to learn many, many things the hard way. So, without further ado, I am going to get into the actual story. So as I said earlier, I am mainly going to talk about the 2 years that I lived with this person. But I do need to give a tiny amount of context to the story I am about to tell. So in 2020, when people, I don't remember who it was, but someone rediscovered her new Twitter account. She was in the Swiftie fandom. And the only reason that's relevant is because I was still at a point where I fully believed her. I fully believed her sob story about the whole fake pregnancy. I believed her. And again, I know now all of that lies. I'm 100% on the side of everybody else that she manipulated and pulled into her lies. I do not believe anything that has come out of her mouth at this point in time. I want to be absolutely clear on that. I harbor no sympathy or empathy for her in my heart, and at the time I did, and it came back to bite me in the ass, as we will get into. But essentially, I reached out to her in 2020, and we became friends again. Eventually, after being friends again with her for 2 years, and being told some long sob story about how she was actually pregnant but lost the baby, which, again, this absolutely did not happen, but I was very gullible at the time. Lemon asked if I wanted to move in with her and her fiance, and at this time, tensions were a little high in my parents' house. I had dropped out of college back in 2019. I had already made 2 failed attempts to move out of their house before, and they made it clear to me that they did not trust Lemon and believed her to be bad news. And I wish I had listened to them from the start, but as I've said before, and as many people know, Lemon was a master manipulator, and she weaponized the tension between myself and my parents, convincing me that they were the problem, that they were not only holding me back, but that they were emotionally and mentally abusing me. Again, none of this is true. And I would even go so far as to say, at worst, what we were experiencing were normal growing pains that parents experience when their only child is struggling to navigate the world around them as an adult. But I was stubborn and defensive and fully on the lemon train. So I moved 7 hours away from my family. I lived with her for 2 years. And within those 2 years, I learned just how much I would put up with before I broke. And I want to be clear here. When somebody is falling victim to narcissistic abuse, it doesn't start out bad. It usually starts out with you thinking, this person's really cool, and I want to be more like this person, and this person's doing all these nice things for me. So I had a great summer. We went hiking, we went swimming, we took a trip to Nashville a couple times. But then, and here's the kicker, guys, Lemmy got pregnant. For real this time. And I was excited for her because it was healthy and she gave birth to a beautiful baby who I was an aunt to. And I sacrificed a lot of my free time to help her around the house despite having a full-time job at the time. For the first 2 months of the baby's life, everything was going smoothly. I offered to help, but I was only asked on rare occasions. And then that changed. I don't know when exactly it changed. I just know one day it just switched. And it was somewhere once the baby was past the sleep, eat, poop, cry, sleep, repeat phase. I was helping Lemon nearly every night while her fiance went to work night shift. And I enjoyed spending all of that time with the baby at first. And then it started cutting into my sleep schedule. And rather than ever tell me I didn't have to help late in the evening or tell me I could go to bed before the baby went to sleep, which was always at nearly 3 a.m., mind you, I'm not a parent. I don't ever really plan to be a parent, but that does not strike me as a good schedule to have your infant on. But even when she could see how exhausted I was, Lemon would simply get mad if I ever appeared the least bit sad, irritable, tired, etc. Anytime I had an emotion other than happy-go-lucky, eager to do whatever she wanted me to do, she made it feel like an inconvenience to her. I was never allowed to be anything but agreeable. And I cannot stress that enough. Like, once they have a hold on you, once a narcissist has a hold on you, it is all about them. And if you are not agreeable to that, they make you feel like you are the problem. They make you feel like you are inconveniencing them and overreacting, and that you aren't allowed to have negative emotions at all. And she would later tell me that I was problematic because I didn't know how to communicate, but she made it impossible to even want to attempt to communicate, which I'm sure there are people who may watch this who dealt with her firsthand who know exactly what I'm talking about. And why would I even attempt to communicate anything to someone who already saw my negative emotions as an inconvenience? Like, she's already over it. She's already done. There would be times where, like, I would be, let me just give a rundown of what I would be doing. I would be making bottles, washing dishes, like all the dirty dishes that I rarely cooked. So it was mostly, their mess. It was constant. It was constant. And then you'd think that that's already bad, right? Then December of 2023 rolls around. I'm like about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half into living there now. And this has been going on for a while, but I'm just dealing with it, rolling with the punches. And December of 23 rolls around, and Lemon finds out she is pregnant again. And she asks me if I will be a full-time nanny for her once the second baby is born. And I don't know why I agreed. I think I really wanted to just take care of the baby, the first baby, full-time, when she had the newborn, because I thought that quitting my day job would ease my stress. I was like, okay, well, at least I'm only doing one thing. I'm not, like, trying to balance getting up at, like, 10 or 11 after going to bed at 3 or 4 in the morning, which, by the way, I had, like, zero wind down time. Whenever I would be tired, by the way, she would get irritated with me, and she'd be like, well, you can go. And there was one night, she was like, don't worry about it, I'll do it. And I was like, okay. And I just let her, like, do what she needed to do in terms of, like, getting the baby ready for bed and getting herself ready for bed. And I got a passive-aggressive text message that was like, if you want to be a full-time nanny, then you need to get used to this, because the workload is going to be a lot harder than this. I was doing what I was doing without getting paid for it and also working a job on the side. I fully understood that being a full-time nanny was a large workload. But I also knew that I'd be being compensated for it. And at the time, I was doing a lot of the same shit I would have been doing as a full-time nanny with zero compensation. There would be times where she would ask me to, call off work for the day to take care of the baby. And I would, in return for watching the baby, I'd get a meal. I wouldn't get paid for it. They would buy me lunch. And it wasn't just like an hour or so. There were times that I would watch the baby for a long time. Long time. And again, I loved that child. I still harbor love in my heart for that child because, again, baby's innocent. Baby didn't do anything wrong. Baby's a baby. Born to a terrible person. And I'm going to get into how that also, like, added to how hard it was to break free, because I genuinely think I would have not put up with the bullshit as long as I did if a baby had not been in the picture. But that was her using my empathy and sympathy that I had for her. She's taking advantage of that and pulling on my heartstrings. And I will get into how the penultimate time that she used that to her advantage in a second. I thought quitting my day job would ease my stress. I wasn't thinking really. I was already dealing with months of sleep deprivation at this point, and I was doing horribly financially. And since moving in, my portion of the rent had been raised twice. And I didn't really understand why, but I just let it go. April 9th, 2024 was the day of reckoning. Before I fully get into that sleep deprivation I was talking about, her manipulation tactics were so good that I truly thought that I just wasn't strong enough to deal with being an adult. I thought that I was weak. She would often make very backhanded jokes, and she would get upset with me when I was visibly hurt by it. And it would be anything from my looks to my inexperience in romantic relationships to my lack of certain life experiences, lack of certain life skills that I hadn't been given, just a bunch of different things. And she would often joke about how I had no prospects. And there were times, like with clothes especially, like that strawberry dress that I wore in the Durham vlog. I bought that strawberry dress when I lived with her still. And the first time I put it on, she said, it's giving school teacher. And I was like, oh. I was like, is that bad? And she was like, well, if that's what you're going for, I wouldn't wear it. Tell me why. The second I got home and I finally started wearing that dress, I never wore that dress when I lived with her. I never wore it because I was self-conscious about it. I put that dress on every single time I've worn that dress. It's now my favorite dress. Every single time I've worn that dress, I get compliments. Every single time people ask me where I got the dress, and people tell me it's cute. So I guess there was some jealousy being harbored there. Even I can't fully explain how she had such a hold, but there was just something about narcissists where they have this magnetic pull. And again, people who knew her back in the day probably can vouch for that. And instead of, fully processing how mean she actually was to me, I always took it as, oh, I'm just being sensitive. I'm just being sensitive. I need to get over myself. Because there have been many times in my past where I have been too sensitive. But this was not one of those times. And there were other people who saw it and were trying to talk to me about it. Like my mother tried so many times to say, I think you're doing too much. You're not being compensated for this. You're being taken advantage of, and it makes me mad. And I would always tell her, like, don't speak too loudly. She'll hear and she'll be mad about it. All these different things. And I realized that I was walking on eggshells. And for a little bit, I thought there was no way out of it. Like, I thought that I was fully convinced that if I went back and moved back into my parents' house, that I would be even more miserable than I was there. Because, 50% was because she'd convinced me that I would be miserable if I moved back in with my parents. But anyway, April 9th, 2024 was the day of reckoning. I came home from work and had brought lunch home. The second I stepped through the front door, Lemon asked me to watch the baby. Well, actually, she didn't ask me. Much like she never really asked me to do the other things that I did. More so, it was a statement, or often a demand. She would say, the baby needs a bottle. And rather than get up and go do it herself. And she would claim that it was because she was on bed rest. But there were times that when I wasn't there, like when I was working, she was perfectly fine to do it on her own. So I don't understand. It was laziness is really what it was. It was someone else is here to do it, so I'm going to make them do it. She saw me as her little robot companion, basically. I ran errands with her. Her fiance would usually just sit on the couch and play video games when he wasn't working. It was very rare that they would run errands together. I was usually the one to go. I was usually the one to do the dishes. When we cleaned, when she cleaned, she would usually sit somewhere and tell me what to do. And then she would be like, oh, look, I cleaned the kitchen. And I'd be like, I cleaned the kitchen. You sat there and told me what to do. But I would bite my tongue. April 9th, 2024 is the day of reckoning. I came home from work, brought lunch home. The second I stepped through the front door, Lemon said, oh, good, you're home in time. You can watch the baby while we go drop off our rental car and pick up our actual car that had been in the shop. And this is the only time that this man ever spoke up for me and said that she should just let me chill out and eat after getting home from work, and suggested that they just take the baby with them. And she huffed and glared at me and grabbed her stuff and went downstairs. She proceeded to send me a very passive-aggressive text message telling me that I just shouldn't help anymore and that my attitude was atrocious, and she claimed I was stressing her out and it was bad for the pregnancy, much like those that were here at the time now. A lack of a notice from Dan and Phil during a live stream was bad for her very much fake pregnancy, but I will elaborate on that in just a moment. I don't see how me cleaning the kitchen every night, doing dishes every other day, feeding the baby dinner, the bedtime bottle, washing bottles every single night, and rocking the baby to sleep at 3 a.m. every weeknight without fail, because Lemon had made it so her child wanted me to rock her to sleep instead of her own mother, was causing Lemon stress. I was also doing all of this with zero compensation. I just want to reiterate that. Zero compensation. So that evening, I ordered my dinner. I stayed in my room until Lemon screamed while she was changing a diaper. And I walked out and I asked what had happened. And she started screaming at me to fuck off. You never want to actually help. And for some reason, that night was finally the night that I decided I was done with her shit. So I told her she wasn't going to speak to me like that, especially after everything I had done for her in the last year. And the second I stood up for myself, the first time in 2 years, and to my memory, the only time, I'd ever stood up to this woman. She goes off. She screamed in my face, threatening to call the police if I didn't get out of her house. Wasn't her house. Just pointing that out. We were all paying rent. Then stormed into my room, ripped all of my clothes out of my closet, and threw them on the floor. She screamed obscenities at me that are too terrible for me to repeat. I will not repeat them now. She told me that I was always the problem, that I just took from people until I was done with them, which, again, narcissists love to do this thing where they will project the way they act onto you and say that you're the problem, when really, like, the truth is, everything she was telling me was the way she was treating me. She said I was a horrible person who deserved to be alone and suffer for the rest of my life. And I knew she was projecting, but I also knew by the look in her eyes that she had this weird sense of relief at saying these things. Like, oh, now that I've finally been found out, I can say everything that I've been thinking. I knew then and there that it was likely that she had never actually thought of me as a friend and was always thinking about how she could use me and how I could benefit her. And the second she realized she'd been found out and she couldn't control me anymore, she snapped and dropped the mask. So I started packing my things. I called my singular other friend that I had out there. And Lemon sat on the floor and started crying. And I knew they were crocodile tears, because at this point, the facade was up. I fully knew who I was dealing with, but she put on a performance, and she suddenly, I'm not kidding you guys, those of you that were on Rise that day will remember this like it was yesterday. I'm not kidding you. She held her stomach, claiming she was having really bad cramps and needed to go to the ER. And I knew she was full of shit. She had pulled this exact nonsense on Rise after Dan and Phil had been live, the day she pretended to go into stress-induced labor. We all remember it, that were there, because she didn't get a shout out on the live stream as a top fan. We all remember that happening. She went and got the baby out of her playpen and sat down with her in her lap and just stared at me expectantly. And she sat there crying, used her child as a bargaining chip, begging me to stay, apologizing, backtracking, claiming it was just her hormones, that she was just stressed out. I stayed that night. And I stayed because I wasn't sure what to do. And I stayed for that baby. I stayed for the 11-month-old with red puffy eyes and tear-stained cheeks, whose mother had just left her in the playpen to cry as she screamed at me and went on a rampage around the house, throwing things and punching walls. I was, safe to say, a wreck. I cried on the phone to my mother on FaceTime, on and off, for 3 hours while Lemon went to the hospital. And I was repeatedly just rocking the baby to sleep. Every time I put her down, she would wake up and cry. I could not bear to hear it, so I eventually, because I was going to try and go to sleep. I was going to try and sleep because I had no idea how soon Lemon was going to be out of the hospital. So eventually, I just decided to hold her the whole time, and I stayed up. My mother saw how mentally and emotionally exhausted I was. She saw how defeated I felt. She begged me to come home. I agreed pretty quickly. I no longer felt safe there after Lemon blew up the way she did. And the second I told my mother that, she simply said, honey, we need to get you out of there, and I just broke. So I packed my things over the next 3 days, and on April 13th of this year, I left. My dad came and got me. It was not pretty. Lemon tried to start a physical fight, even landing a few punches, because when I was trying to get my stuff out to leave, at one point, she had taken my phone, because she gave me this phone when she upgraded her old one. Mine broke, and when she upgraded her old one to a new one, she gave me this one. But I had been paying the bill on this phone for quite a few months at that point. So, it was no longer her phone. She had no stake in it. And she was like, oh, I'm taking it back, it's mine. I was like, it's not yours. I pay for it now. It's not your phone. So she threw it down the stairs at me in an attempt to break it. Now, luckily, it had a very good case on it. It's still got the same case on it, and so it's fine. Luckily, no cracks. Then, when I was going to go upstairs to get the last of my stuff, she was stood at the top of the stairs with this evil grin on her face. And I was like, I still have stuff up there. You want me to get all of it out? And she was like, mm-hmm. And I said, okay, well, can I go get it? And she goes, well, try to get by me. And I took a step back because, like, I was not about to stoop to the level of brawling with a pregnant woman, because yes, she was actually pregnant at this time as well. I can't believe I have to, like, clarify that, but I do. And I said, you know what? This is why you don't have any friends. Because she doesn't. Because I was her only friend. And she couldn't even actually treat me like a friend. I don't think she's truly capable of it. So when I came home, it was bad at first. I had nightmares. Because when I did step back and tell her that this is why you don't have friends, she lunged at me. She threw some punches. Her fiance got up and held her back while I ran down the stairs. My dad had called the police. I would like to also add that during this whole debacle, during me getting stuff out, she was saying crazy ass shit. She threatened to shoot my father. She was saying, there's strangers on my property. Maybe I'll have to go downstairs and get that rifle. There were points during this that I did fear for my life. I feared for my well-being as well as my father's, and I just wanted to get out of there. So when she lunged at me and threw punches and attempted to assault me, I wasn't thinking about pressing charges. I was just thinking, I want to get out of here. When I got home, there were a couple bruises on me. There was one massive one on my thigh from when she threw her phone at me. And then there was a big one on this arm from when she, I think, landed a punch. But luckily, I mostly avoided being, badly injured. So at least there's that. She wanted to destroy everything that I loved. She wanted to isolate me. And it was difficult. It was difficult coming home. I had nightmares at first for the first couple of months. About a week after coming home, that's when I started watching Dan and Phil's videos again regularly. And they were, in part, a wake-up call for me. About a month or so before I moved out of that house, I watched a couple of videos, and I kind of, had a moment of, why did I ever stop watching them? Why did I ever decide that I didn't like their videos anymore? And that was, part of the isolation tactic. She was just so convincing all around of everybody else being the problem, and she had this bitterness toward the fandom and toward Dan and Phil, which was really weird, because, like, it's just really weird. But I do want to point out that I lost a lot of my sense of self when I was in that house. I still to this day am having trouble figuring out who I am now, who I want to be, and what makes me me. It has gotten a little bit better day by day. But what has helped me so much is this community, Dan and Phil's videos, going to Terrible Influence, and seeing everybody and knowing that there is so much love and support in this community, and reading You Will Get Through This Night. If you have not read Dan's book and you are dealing with any kind of trauma, any kind of self-loathing, any kind of confusion, or feeling like the world is cruel and will never get better, or like you're stuck and will never get better, like I did when I was there in that situation in that house. If you feel any of those things, I seriously recommend you read Dan's book. And if you've read it once, read it again, or listen to the audiobook, because there are so many things in that book, especially like the temporary things, the instant things, that I use to this day to ground myself. And I don't think that I would be doing as well as I am now if it weren't for this community. And I'm trying really hard not to get weepy about it because I don't want to be like over dramatic or anything. But this community is so important to me and has been such a shining light in such a dark time. And I actually wrote Dan and Phil a letter that I gave them on Wednesday that talks, not in as much detail as I just gave you guys, but like that does talk about this a little bit and explains like that she wanted to destroy everything I loved and she wanted to isolate me, and I'm so glad that I did break free from it and I didn't fully let her do that to me. I wouldn't wish the experience I had with her on my worst enemy, but I know I have come out stronger in spite of her. And this is not just me wanting to trauma dump and continue to badmouth her, because everybody here in this community already knows that she's not a good person. But I felt that it was important to tell this story, and I felt that it was important for me to get it off my chest because I've been sitting on it for the past, 8 months. And I want people who were involved in that situation at the time to know like that I see them and I understand them now. I wanted to use this as a learning tool, like as a way to educate people. And again, like I said, there's some very young and impressionable people in this fandom, in this community, who I worry could end up in a similar situation to me, because this is the internet and the internet can be dangerous. It can be wonderful. There's so many people in this community that are so supportive, like everybody who supported me in getting me to Tyson's for that show, everybody who I met at the Durham show, everybody who has talked to me about the situation in private, who has said, if you feel comfortable telling your story, come forward. I do also want to point out that for the last couple months that I was living there, I did experience suicidal ideation. It was passive. I never did actually, have a plan or want to harm myself, but there were times when I would go to bed at night, wishing that I would not wake up the next morning. There were times I would go to bed at night thinking that the world would be better if I wasn't in it. And I only recently was able to watch the ending to Lad because of that. Because a lot of my friends warned me that I probably, because of my trauma and everything that I dealt with in those initial, first couple months after I came home, I was warned by friends, when Lad premiered, they were like, maybe stay away from that ending for a little bit. But I did recently watch that, and I did cry hard. In a way, having gone through what I have, and I told Dan and Phil this at my first meet and greet with them in Tyson's this tour. I said that to see them be put through what they have over the years and not allow it to make them bitter has taught me that negative people and negative events are not what make you stronger, but you have to make a conscious decision as an individual to become stronger in spite of it. And I'm just so incredibly proud of them, and I'm so glad that they're back, because it truly has been a wake-up call for me. I mean that so incredibly sincerely. It has been such a privilege to be back in this community, and after 4 years of not watching, picking up exactly where I left off, I'm just so thankful to be back in this community and to feel the love and support that I have in just the last couple of weeks. And I hope that it continues for years to come. Thank you guys.